North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. We bring you the news, the real news. We analyze the news for fact. We make commentary. And then there's debate. Glad you are here. This is Wednesday. It is the 3rd day of August, year of our Lord 2022. And there were big elections yesterday, and there was an awful lot on the line for people whose names you know. And we will discuss all of that here in just a couple of moments. So let me talk to you a little bit about this news analysis, commentary, and debate. We report the news. We analyze it for fact. We point out fact and the news and the differences, and then we also point out bias. From there, I make commentary. That is not the news. The news is not my commentary. The news is essentially the information we have to deal with for the day. My commentary is my opinion, just as valuable as yours. Please share it. 817-379-2172. That's the debate part. This is interactive. If you would care to either call us or chat with us, which you can do by heading over to either Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch, and let me know what's going on. We've got people from YouTube and Twitch already today, and I want to thank you very much for being a part of this show. As I said, there were all kinds of primaries last night. There were 5, and they were critical. And let's talk a little bit about the reporting on some of that. 6 takeaways from Kansas, Michigan, Missouri, Arizona, and Washington. This is CNN, so I will point out the bias as we come across it. Kansas voters handed abortion rights activists a victory yesterday, surging to the polls to defeat a measure that would have allowed the GOP-led legislature to improve new restrictions. The vote in Kansas was one of the first tests of the potency of abortion rights at the ballot box since the Supreme Court's re-decision on Roe v. Wade. Meanwhile, in Michigan, one of the top 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump was ousted. There's more on that. The matchup was set for what will be one of the key gubernatorial races this fall, and in Missouri, the political comeback of a former governor was shut down. In Arizona, local election officials are still counting votes. Interesting. They're still trying to figure out what is next when it comes to Arizona voting. And so they're still counting, and I always get nervous when they count after Election Day. It always bugs me, and for very, very good reason. Kansas voters sent a dramatic message yesterday opting to maintain the right to an abortion in their state's constitution weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court decided to overturn Roe v. Wade. Polls have long shown that voters overwhelmingly supported protecting abortion rights, but the win for the no vote in Kansas is proof of that and signals that the Supreme Court decision has further angered voters and possibly shifted the politics of the issue ahead of the November elections. That is a supposition on CNN's part. It belies their bias. Now, regarding all of this, like I said, the first Roe v. Wade decision changed the nation. It absolutely changed the nation and the way our society operates. This one will do the same thing. All this decision did was return the issue of abortion and abortion rights to the states so that the voters themselves could be heard. And that is exactly what happened in Kansas. Therefore, I pointed out when this happened, there will be overreaches on both sides. This is probably an example of some of that overreach with regards to an amendment to the Kansas state constitution. That may be a bridge too far, and this is one side of the equilibrium. As things move through, there will be overreach on both sides. And so that is just another bit of the pendulum swinging one way or another. Representative Peter Meijer became the second of 10 Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump to be ousted in a primary. He lost to Trump-endorsed conservative challenger John Gibbs, according to CNN's projections. Democrats played a role in boosting Gibbs, a calculated decision that has become a flashpoint, angering Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans. Meijer, a freshman, voted to impeach Trump just days after taking office after the the so-called insurrection of January 6th. They could CNN just calls it an insurrection. For me, if the BLM protests were peaceful protests in search of social justice, all this was a peaceful protest. That's my opinion, not the news. The Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, they saw the seat as a possible pickup. They spent $300,000 on television ads seeking to bolster Gibbs with pro-Trump GOP primary voters by portraying him as a Trump-aligned conservative. In Washington, two more Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, Representatives Jaime Herrera Butler and Dan Newhouse, were attempting to survive their own primaries. The state's open nonpartisan primary system, in which top two finishers, regardless of party, advanced to the general election, made them more difficult targets for Trump and his supporters. Once again, note the bias. Arizona's race for the Republican nomination for governor could depend on whether President Trump's supporters turned out in force on Election Day in a state that conducts its contests largely by mail. Karen Taylor Robson, a former member of the Arizona Board of Regents who is backed by former President Mike Pence and outgoing Governor Doug Ducey, led former television journalist Carrie Lake, a Trump-endorsed election denier, again, the bias, in early returns on Wednesday morning. But given the early results were largely mail-in, voters cast on Election Day, or votes cast on Election Day, were expected to favor Lake, a result of Trump's years-long effort to undermine faith in mail-in voting. Again, more bias. I have to point this out. Even President Trump's Attorney General said that mail-in voting was rife for fraud, and he was correct, absolutely correct. It's not Trump's work to try to undermine faith in mail-in voting. No one has faith in mail-in voting. No one. Nobody has any idea where those votes come from. Election days are supposed to be where people show up. That's part of the recipe. You're supposed to show up. Therefore, the people that care most about their states, their counties, their nation, those are the people that make the decisions. If people don't want to make decisions about any of those, local, state, what have you, then they don't get a voice by choice. And to put this in the hands of making it just a mail-in and so on with ballot harvesting and all of that, it is fraught with peril. Absolutely fraught with peril. Once again, back to the CNN coverage. If Trump's slate of statewide candidates in Arizona advances to the general election, they'd be positioned to take over the election machinery of one of the nation's most important presidential background states if they win in November. Blake Masters, a venture capitalist endorsed by President Trump, backed by millions in spending from GOP megadonor Peter Thiel, won the state's GOP primary to take on Democrat Senator Mark Kelly. State Representative Mark Fincham, a Trump-endorsed Stop the Steal activist who has said the state legislature should be able to overturn the voters' will in presidential election, won the GOP primary for Secretary of State, according to CNN. Democrats saw a tight race between Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes and State Representative Reginald Boulding. And in the state's Attorney General race, Trump's preferred candidate, election denier Abraham Hamadeh, won the Republican nomination, according to CNN. There was also one person who had defied Trump and his election lies ousted on Tuesday. You know, this is counterproductive to the journalistic effort. CNN, for whatever reason, just cannot report straight news. They simply can't do it. There was also one person who had defied Trump and his president and his election lies ousted on Tuesday, according to a CNN projection. That's Rusty Bowers, the Arizona House Speaker. Bowers testified in June about the pressure he faced to overturn the state's 2020 election results from Trump and others. In return, he was censured by his party, called unfit to serve, and has now lost his primary for a state Senate seat. Well, once again, you simply have to do the will of the people. You simply do. And the people get to make a choice. The people vote. And all these things, when I'm talking about the problems with the journalistic effort from CNN, unable to back off of this Trump hatred that permeates everything they do, It's counterproductive. It's counterproductive, and it's costing it is costing the Democrat Party politically. And I've always said that the linkage between the mainstream media and the Democrat Party was dangerous, not just for we the people of the United States, but dangerous for both the media and the Democrat Party. And so as we sit here today, we're seeing more examples of exactly what I've been talking about. You simply have to report the news. You simply have to report the way things sit on the table. So there was one person who had defied President Trump in his election lies, ousted on Tuesday. You could say it this way. There was someone who disagreed with President Trump regarding his thoughts on the election, ousted on Tuesday. This according to a CNN projection. Rusty Bowers, the Arizona House Speaker. Bowers testified in June about the pressure he faced to overturn the 2020 election results from Trump and others. In return, he was censured by his party, called unfit to serve, and has now lost his primary for a state Senate seat. Okay, so I understand all that, but this is CNN trying to blame the voters for the decisions that we make every single election, and that is pervasive around the mainstream media. Republicans in Missouri breathed a sigh of relief after State Attorney General Eric Schmidt won the wide-open Senate primary, according to a CNN projection. Perhaps more significant than who won in the deep red state is who lost, disgraced former Governor Eric Greitens, who was attempting a political comeback. Greitens resigned in 2018 amid a sex scandal and an accusation of campaign misconduct, and subsequently faced abuse allegations from his ex-wife, which he has denied. Schmidt, the Attorney General, emerged from a crowded field that included two members of Congress, Representative Vicky Hartzler and Billy Long. Trump stayed out of the race, issuing a tongue-in-cheek statement supporting Eric on the eve of the primary, leaving it up to voters' interpretation whether that meant Schmidt or Greitens. Thing about that is this: the president could have made a straightforward decision on that. I'm talking about President Trump. President Trump could have made a straightforward assessment of that race and picked one of the Erics. That he didn't do that is perplexing to me. Tudor Dixon, the conservative commentator endorsed by President Trump in the final days of the race, backed by large factions in the Michigan Republican establishment, won the state's GOP primary to take on Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The clash in Michigan could be one of the nation's most competitive governor races. Whitmer cast herself as a bulwark for abortion rights in a state where Republicans have sought to enforce a 1931 law that would impose a near total ban on abortion. Dixon, meanwhile, framed the race in her victory speech as a referendum on restrictions Whitmer imposed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dixon is a mother of four who is backed by former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos's family. She's an advocate for school choice, potentially positioning elections, or education rather, as a marquee issue in the November midterm elections. There is other information coming from the primaries, especially in Michigan, that may or may not please or concern you. We will have that in just a little bit. Once again, you can call me 817-379-2172. I've already gotten a call from somebody who was trying to get me to join the Shriners. Give us a buzz. We'll be back with more in just a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. You can chat with me. This is an interactive broadcast. There's a chat room. Why don't you jump into it? Let's see who's there right now. Yvonne Field says hi. Let's see. I believe this is effing book. Effing book. Well, hi, F. It's good to have you. Thanks very much for being here, and I'm glad you like the voice. That was given to me by Marjorie Albee, the world's greatest voice teacher, who, in the ultimate act of casting pearls before swine, taught me the classics. And she built this voice. This voice was built. It was not born, I swear. But thanks very much, Epping. I appreciate it. Let's see what else. F says that CNN is sinking lower and lower and lower every year. He said that Mike Savage said one day CNN would be a test pattern, never thought it would happen, but CNN is falling. I think what's interesting about that is this. What I think about when I talk about this, CNN, it's a bigger problem than just CNN. The entire media is down to an 11% approval rating, which is the lowest it's ever been. And that's the mainstream media. And the mainstream media is there because they have abandoned the truth and they have chosen political sides. Now, it doesn't make any difference which side you pick. Let's put it this way. The spectacular and sensationalist news broadcast where people run off at the mouth instead of telling you what you should do is frankly more popular. And this show proves it. I report the news. Do I report the news in the classic way of a half an hour news broadcast or a 1 hour news broadcast? No, I don't. And the reason is because I'm a talk radio host on radio mostly. And so there is a day part, a time for the show. In this particular case, it's from 3 until 6 p.m. Monday through Friday in the Eastern time zone. And so there are things that have to be discussed. I believe this news is important. I believe that this ream of information that we get every day should be reported. It should be analyzed for fact. It should be opined about, not just me, but you too. I mean, it could be if it wasn't for the fact that I have to declare that once that I do have an opinion on things and we do discuss these things, that it's just my opinion. Nobody else does that in this business. They assure you that what they're thinking and what they're saying is absolute truth and news. Well, it's not. It's just what I think. And yeah, there's a time thing there. I mean, there is a lot of news. But what I'm trying to get across is that the straightforward production of a show that discusses the news isn't necessarily as flashy as, say, for example, Alex Jones, who's now fighting for his financial life because he ran off at the mouth at the wrong time. And we'll get to that later on in the broadcast. That'll be in the third hour, the third podcast hour of the Wells Report. We'll have that there. But yeah, sooner or later, that's going to be a thing. Arthur says that a lot of us travel and use mail voting. We get the ballot because we're registered to vote. We care and we vote. Well, that's what absentee voting is all about, Arthur. And that's not mail-in voting. It's absentee voting. I don't think it's asking too much for people, we the people specifically, enumerated in the Constitution of the United States, to take time out of their busy work life and vote. Okay, so there you go. Let's see. Trump would do himself a lot of good if he quit claiming he won the election. Well, I think he's slowly bringing that down. Marjorie Albee. Never knew I had a vocal coach. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Marjorie Albee. God, she was a saint. Let's see. We'll talk more as we come back. We've got more of this election coverage on the Wells Report in just a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. There is a hearing on virus research regarding gain of function. The chairman of this hearing is Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, who happens to be a medical doctor. He's an MD. He's an eye surgeon. And there are amazing things that are coming out of this hearing. But it is stultifyingly boring. I mean, it's like, oh my God. I mean, it's so straightforward. But one of the politicians that was speaking mentioned in that hearing just moments ago that SARS-CoV-2, that virus, is a weapon of mass destruction. Now, I have been saying that for years. Now, I attribute that to a lab leak. At this particular moment, that's still up in the air, but I can't figure out why. A simple analysis of the genome would prove one way or another. And why we don't have that, I don't know. I don't have any idea. But the idea, as far as I'm concerned, that this is a weapon of mass destruction is, I think, a viable one that has been borne out by other people that are thinking about this very same issue. We're monitoring this. If anything comes out of it, we'll be more than happy to share that with you. But I just want to put that out there for whatever that was worth. That is going on right now. We were talking a little bit about elections, and Arthur pointed out that he is a traveling man, and that mail-in ballots have really helped him out from a ballot standpoint. And he pointed out, hey, we do care about our country and we want to vote. Well, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you, Arthur. And he mentions that mail-in votes happen in Alaska and California. They also happen in Oregon. And take a look at those states. One of my dearest friends on this planet, Joel Vertel, just moved out of Alaska because it's turned into a liberal wasteland, at least as he experienced it. And he came back to Texas, which is really good for Texas and really sad for Alaska. Joel Vertel's a hell of a man. And we're lucky to have him back. But there are problems with mail-in voting. It allows the political machine way too much latitude on how votes appear to be counted. And that was the problem that I have with the 2020 election. It isn't necessarily that the counting that they had, the ballots that they had were, I'm sure, counted properly. But where did those ballots come from? That's what we haven't investigated. That's what we don't know about. And that's what we have to get to the bottom of. That's been my point forever. So let's see. Everything else. Gary says that Anthony Fauci will never be held accountable. None of them will for anything all the way back to Whitewater. Well, okay. Let's see what else. Okay. So let me get back to the election coverage from CNN. Representative Haley Stevens' projected Democrat victory in Michigan in the newly drawn 11th congressional district over fellow Representative Andy Levin marks another blow against the progressive squad in the U.S. House of Representatives. And even CNN points out progressives have had a mostly disappointing primary season. Maybe Democrats are beginning to wake up that this idea of socialism is a mess. And the more that it is fed and the more that it's empowered, the worse it gets. It's also a resounding victory for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or IPAC, and its super PAC, United Democracy Project, which has spent millions backing moderate, more staunchly pro-Israel candidates in Democrat primaries. Aha! At last, the actual proper use of a political action committee. Stevens and Levin are both supportive of Israel, but Levin, who is Jewish, has been more willing to criticize its government's treatment of Palestinians, is the lead sponsor of the Two-State Solution Act. Progressive Democrats, frequently targeted by IPAC and their spending in this primary season, have fumed at fellow Democrats for accepting or courting support from the group, which has also contributed to the Republican election deniers. Once again, Republican election deniers. Come on, guys. Come on, CNN. Wake up now. Big bad world. You know, the election happened. There are people that have questions about it. They are not the enemy. The enemy is ignorance. Let's solve the ignorance and we'll stop having the problem. Hello. Anyway, IPAC has defended the practice, arguing its policy goals need bipartisan support. Correct. Absolutely. J Street, a liberal pro-Israel group that clashed with IPAC, tried to boost Levin with a $700,000 July ad buy, but that sum paled in comparison to the millions bundled by AIPAC or IPAC and more than the $4 million spent by the UDP. All right, so that is CNN's take on the takeaways. Now, what I find interesting about that is that even CNN is having trouble hiding the results of yesterday's primary elections. So this goes to USA Today. They also lead with the Kansas anti-abortion measure story. Kansas voters, the first to express how their state's constitution should address abortion rights. And it was a drubbing, they say, against anti-abortion forces. By roughly 20 percentage points, Kansas rejected the so-called Value Them Both amendment, which would have allowed Republican-controlled state legislatures to put new restrictions on the procedure or prohibit it entirely. It's not just Republicans, just saying. Let's see what else is going on. Trump influence in Arizona. Arizona Republican primaries continued the proxy war that Trump has engaged with GOP officials, including former Vice President Mike Pence. At the gubernatorial level, former TV journalist Kari Lake, who was backed by Trump, and Karen Taylor Robson, a former member of the Arizona Board of Regents who was endorsed by Pence and incumbent Governor Doug Ducey, are still in a tight race to be the state's Republican nominee. As of early today, Lake had pulled ahead. Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who battled false assertions about fraud in the 2020 presidential election, easily grabbed the Democrat nomination for governor. So Democrat Senator Mark Kelly's GOP opponent in the fall will be Trump-backed Blake Masters, who outpaced businessman Jim Lamon and Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich. Masters tried to cast doubt on the legitimacy of midterm elections. He also had the backing of tech billionaire Peter Thiel. Let's see. Kelly is a prolific fundraiser. He's raked in $52 million. Whoa. But Republicans are determined to make his re-election one of the more competitive contests in November. The Arizona Senate race is one of a handful of toss-up elections that will determine who controls the Senate in 2023. And then the election denier rhetoric coming out of the mainstream media from USA Today. This midterm election, many candidates who argue the 2020 presidential race was stolen seek to oversee the next round of elections in bids for secretaries of state. Mark Fincham, an Arizona legislator, has long promoted Trump's, and once again we have this rhetoric, Trump's false claims about the election. I don't believe they're false claims. I believe that Donald Trump truly believes what he says about the election. He won the GOP primary to be chief election officer against multiple rivals. Fincham is a part of a Trump-backed coalition of Secretary of State candidates running in swing states. In Georgia, Representative Jody Hice lost his bid to kick out the incumbent Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who defied Trump's demands to find more votes in the 2020 election. In Nevada, another swing state, Jim Marchant, who said the election was stolen from Trump, easily won a 7-way GOP primary for Secretary of State in June. Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers is among the Republicans who rejected Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Bowers testified publicly this summer at one of the hearings by the House committee investigating the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Isn't it interesting? They changed their rhetoric. USA Today has changed the rhetoric. They're no longer calling it the January 6th committee. How interesting. Now they're saying that it is the House committee investigating the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. It is actually a select committee investigating the January 6th incursion. By the way, Bowers testified that he refused to say the election was rigged. The GOP speaker lost to Trump-backed David Farnsworth, a former state legislator, according to early results. Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt won the state's contest to replace retiring Senator Roy Blunt, which probably had many Republicans breathing a sigh of relief. Eric Greitens, who resigned in 2018 amid allegations of sexual assault and campaign fundraising violations, lost that one pretty badly. Let's see what else. In a final twist, President Trump issued a statement making his endorsement in the race. That was the Eric thing. Michigan GOP nomination for governor goes to a political newcomer. Tudor Dixon, a businesswoman, former conservative TV commentator, won the GOP primary for the Michigan governorship on yesterday. After her win, Dixon said she suspected her race this fall against Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer will be an epic battle and vowed to work to make sure the next 4 years are filled with opportunities and not locked classrooms and massive grocery bills. Tudor Dixon bested businessman Kevin Rinke and chiropractor Garrett Soldano. Whitmer faced no primary opponent and holds the advantage of incumbency in November. In the aftermath of January 6, 10 House Republicans supported removing President Trump from office on charges of inciting the riot. At least they called it a riot. The former president sought revenge, and 3 of those GOP lawmakers, Representative Jaime Herrera Butler and Dan Newhouse of Washington, also Peter Meyer of Michigan, were opposed by pro-Trump challengers on Tuesday. Now, remember, tomorrow, Liz Cheney will face the voters. She will face the voters in what will probably be a defeat for not just Liz Cheney, but the Cheney political machine in Wyoming. Meyer lost his primary bid to John Gibbs. Herrera Butler and Newhouse led their Trump-endorsed challengers in the open primary in Washington, making it likely that they will secure a general elections ballot this fall. Michigan saw 2 House incumbents pitted against each other. Haley Stevens defeated fellow Republican Andy Levin. We just talked about that. This is funny. A conspiracy theory that the pens passed out by poll workers in Arizona to make it possible for voters' choices to be changed came to a head yesterday when the Maricopa County Attorney's Office ordered a Republican candidate to stop spreading the story. In a cease and desist letter to County Board of Supervisors candidate Gail Golek, she was told to stop urging voters to replace government-issued pens at polling stations. As you well know, theft of any sort is unlawful, said Deputy County Attorney Joseph LaRue. Moreover, encouraging theft of fast-drying ink pens specifically recommended for Election Day voting is a deliberate attempt to interfere with election administration. Well, if you can erase the ink, and I'm not really concerned about much of that. And the reason is because if it was up to me, we'd be voting with pencils on paper ballots. We'd get rid of voting machines altogether because we just don't know how they work. And by the way, pencil is indeed erasable. All right, just let's keep this real, okay? But man, it's amazing. I was sitting there reading that article and I went, wow, man, things get really down in the weeds when it talks about close elections, don't they? Stop stealing the pens. Ah! And who came up with the idea that the pens could be erased? People. We voted with pencils for years. Stop it. Just stop it. Stop it. Let's see what else is going on. This also from USA Today. And I wonder how much discomfort the writers had when they wrote this. All right. The headline reads, Donald Trump power broker. Primaries show that he retains a degree of control over the Republican Party. I'll say. Let's see the key points in this one. Donald Trump remains a big force in GOP politics, scoring primary successes in Michigan and Arizona. Trump also saw setbacks in Washington state, maybe. Trump candidates now head into fall elections, which Trump will be an issue. The Trump factor could decide control of the U.S. Senate. As they have throughout the year, Donald Trump and his allies spent another primary night demonstrating they remain a powerful force in Republican Party politics. As in primaries past, Trump movement took a few losses, but it also won nominations for many of their partisans and defeated other Republicans who had been critical of the former president. A Trump candidate defeated Representative Peter Meyer of Michigan, a House Republican who voted to impeach Trump over and they call it an insurrection. That's, of January 6th. Another Trumper defeated an Arizona legislative leader who testified before the Special Congressional Committee investigating January 6th. That's a USA Today thing. Interesting. We are bringing you the news. We're bringing you the issues of the day, and will continue to do so. Let's see. What else is going on? More conspiracies. I don't know what you're talking about, Langston. I really don't, but I'm glad you're here, I think. What conspiracies are you talking about? We can't risk election security. Right, exactly. I'll vote for Trump again, but I like DeSantis. You know, the guy who's getting my attention is Mike Pompeo. You know, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm interested in everybody in the Republican field, including President Trump. I want to see what he's got. But there are other people. I'm just concerned about the people that are trapped by the Republican Party system. More about that as we continue. You're listening to the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. As I said just moments ago, I am watching this gain of function hearing led by Rand Paul in the United States, Senate, and there have been some very explosive things talked about. They just talked about the process of changing a typical cold virus into SARS-CoV-2. And they just talked about the genetic engineering that it takes and how receptive to those changes this particular strand of viruses, coronavirus, how receptive they are to those changes. I mean, I listen, I was listening to this and I'm sitting there going, I didn't even know there were words like that. Yeah. And also, they're talking a little bit more about the genome being taken offline just when things got a little bit crazy regarding coronavirus. But that information is out there. What I'm trying to figure out is how come American officials haven't already talked about it and why we don't know all of this. And oh, by the way, that started during the Trump administration, not the Biden administration. What, are they worried that the United States, the people of the United States, would demand accountability for China? Is that really the problem? If so, pardon my use of a rather colorful metaphor, then China's already down our pants way, way, way too far. Because if our government refuses to let us know exactly what's going on with a disease that killed over 1 million Americans because they're worried that we might ask for accountability against Red China, which government, who in this government is working for the people? Because it looks to me like they're working for the benefit of China. Now, I could be wrong, and that's not a conspiracy theory. That's an observation. Okay, please understand that all I'm doing is I'm looking at the way things actually lay on the table. I'm looking at the facts, the available facts, and I'm interpreting as to where they could go. And if this is too big a mess to report to the American people because the government of the United States is worried the American people will, well, we certainly wouldn't fly off the handle, but a lot of people would have a lot to say, especially the families of victims of SARS-CoV-2, if China was held accountable for it. And they should be. They absolutely should be. You know, there's $13 trillion worth of American debt that currently is held by China. And after they stole the W-88 nuclear warhead, after they stole the programs that allow weapons design in a supercomputer, which they also possess, all of the stealing of intellectual property, all of the espionage. If I was up there, I would write that debt off. I would send them an itemized list of everything that we spent to develop the W-88 nuclear warhead, the expense of the personnel records of just about everybody in the United States, including me. And what I do is I just charge them for it. And I would try to work it out so that after it was all over, we owed about $1.39. Just $1.39. Then I'd sign a check and send it to them. Now, that wouldn't have anything to do with the good faith and credit of the United States of America. What that would do is stop the United States government gravy train that dumps its money and cash and influence and everything else at the feet of the Chinese Communist Party. That's what I would do. I find this to be absolutely ridiculous. This is not difficult. The only thing difficult is to try to drag the truth out of U.S. government officials. And of course, U.S. government officials, so the story goes, trying to drag the truth out of CCP officials in China. So what's the difference? If we don't get to know what the truth is from our own government, then how is it different from the people who run the Chinese government? Doesn't look like there's much difference at all. And so far, the only guy that's actually doing anything about it is Rand Paul. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure it all out. Let's see. Okay. So let's get back to some of the news. Once again, we're talking about USA Today coverage of President Trump and his apparent, got to go back over here. We're talking about President Trump and his influence on the Republican Party. A Trump candidate defeated Representative Peter Meyer. We talked about that. Another Trumper defeated an Arizona legislative leader. We talked about that. Listen to this. Listen to this acid. Acolytes of Trump. Let's see. Acolytes of Trump, who is pondering another run of his own in 2024, Also won or led hard-fought gubernatorial, Senate, and Secretary of State primaries in Arizona, a pivotal state in congressional and presidential elections. It was not a perfect set of primaries. Trump appears to have failed to dislodge two House members from the state of Washington. That makes sense. Trump had an okay night, said Henry Olsen, and once again, that's a big statement coming out of USA Today, considering their bias against Donald Trump. Losing both Washington races hurts him, but he did very well in Arizona, and beating Mayor was important to him. Yeah, he is a big power broker in the Republican Party. Is that good or bad? If you're a Republican, answer that question. 817-379-2172. Give us a call. I'm waiting for your call. This is Wednesday, Hump Day. Back with more in just a moment. Hey, I really mean it. I'm glad you guys are here. Thanks for being a part of this show. It means so much to me. Back with more in North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Hi, I'm John David Wells. We bring you the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We report on both. Then what we do is we make commentary. That's not the news, just my opinion, just as valuable as yours, and that's the debate part. Please do bring me whatever you think is necessary to the conversation. This is our show. This show belongs to us. We don't have to. To find ourselves in a position where we can be browbeaten by the mainstream media for any reason whatsoever, or by the political machine of which the mainstream media is a part. That's by choice. They made that choice. I didn't make that choice. You didn't make that choice. The mainstream media made that choice. And that's why their approval rating is down to 11%. You would not be here if they were doing their job properly. And we do that job as best we can on this broadcast every day, Monday through Friday, from 3 until 6 p.m. on the Eastern time zone, 2 to 5 here in the Central time zone, and on and on. By the way, we've been talking a little bit about Trump's very good night with regard to the primary races. This is news. It comes from USA Today, so you'll have to forgive some of the sneering aspects of the journalism. Former White House counsel Pat Cipollone, who famously testified before the January 6th committee, has been subpoenaed by a federal grand jury investigating the Capitol attack and the campaign to overturn the 2020 election. This is according to a person familiar with the matter. Once again, an anonymous source. And so you know how we feel about, if you don't know, I just was about to say, you know how we feel about anonymous sources. You know, one of the things that I find so disappointing about American journalism is that there is so much running with these people that can say anything they want to because their identities are masked. You know, I have a rule in my personal life that if someone's not willing to put their name on what they talk about, it's basically irrelevant. It's basically irrelevant. And the reason it's irrelevant, they may have great points. They may have great points. They may have a great story to tell. But if they're not putting their name on it, that means they've got a problem with it themselves. If they have a problem with it, then why would somebody who is consuming that as news or information or what have you, why would you not have a problem with it? So that's my story on these anonymous sources. The Justice Department action involving Cipollone comes after White House officials testified last month before the House committee in separate examinations of the January 6, 2021 attack. Cipollone urged then-President Donald Trump to intervene as rioters stormed the Capitol and defended Justice Department officials in rejecting Trump demands to pursue false allegations of election fraud, the bias. Cipollone did not immediately respond to comments. The Justice Department did not immediately respond to comments. The subpoena was first reported by ABC News. And once again, that's the state of play there. So obviously, the president and his conduct being investigated by a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. By the way, this is a problem for me. The use of the Department of Justice as a political tool, the use of the FBI as a political tool, the use of the CIA, NSA, the Department of Homeland Security as political tools. It is the very embodiment of all the unease I felt when the Patriot Act got passed. I talked about it then, too. When George W. Bush and his friends put together the Patriot Act after the 9/11 attacks, I was very nervous about it. It wasn't so much that I was so worried about the officials that were actually putting it together. I was worried about the follow-on aspects of it. And what it has led to is domestic spying on a political basis. And during the Obama administration, and once again, this is not a partisan statement, this is just a statement of fact. During the Obama administration, everything was political. Everything was used as a political tool to benefit the leftist agenda. And that exists to this day. Now, is it changing? Yes. as a lot of these people are being run to earth. But I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm extremely concerned about where this ends up. I believe the voters will have their say. Let's hope that is the case. Trump tried to get the DOJ to say the election was stolen. No, that's not exactly what he did. Once again, that's a partisan statement, Langston. You just keep listening, man. You just keep listening. Let's see what else is going on. I want to dip into some of this coverage of this gain of function hearing, because there's some very interesting things being said. One of the doctors who is testifying said that there were all kinds of regulations surrounding medical research regarding vertebrates. In other words, people with backbones. And I mean, everybody that has a vertebrate, somebody that has a backbone. And he said that none of that exists in the viral world, which is why he is espousing for regulation of this gain of function research. And then Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, said, I'm not seeing any benefit here. I'm not seeing any benefit to the people. The only benefit I see is researchers getting grant money to turn these viruses into monsters. And that's exactly what they're trying to figure out here. So let's dip into a little bit of this. Let's see. This is Stephen Kay. He is an MD and also a PhD. Let's listen to what he has to say.
In your own possession, if you're doing research on it.
Do you think there's any way we can still get any of that data that's missing? I feel like, somewhere we're going to find the grandfather of COVID or a cousin or something here in these data banks. Why did they take them down? And what would be the advantage of them taking it down? Do you think we can ever find what we're missing?
Well, it was taken down at 2 a.m. on September 12th, 2019.
They're talking about the genome data from
hard,
China.
That's a little suspicious to be doing it at that point in time. I believe it contains closer precursors. And my hypothesis is it contains the one that's 50 mutations or 100 mutations, not 1,200 away. And it was too obviously a smoking gun. But again, if you're collaborating on that and you're spending 10 years building a database inside the Women's Virology, you're going to mirror that database in your own facilities, which means that it's got to be at Equal Health Alliance somewhere.
Thank you. Dr. Russell, anything to add?
Just note that I agree with Dr. Ebright's assessment from earlier. To the extent that China is doing this research, it's because it is scientifically sexy and glamorous and is fast, easy, publishable, etc. Okay. Chinese scientists have the same incentives as Western scientists in this regard. And I do not think, in fact, it's very clear that this research is not in China's strategic interest. China has no more interest than we do in handing out the blueprints to agents that can kill millions of people, including their people. This is not in the interest of any established, powerful nation. And the question is, can we show leadership and persuade them of that? Because as long as we're doing it, we are making it, we are contributing to the fact that this is seen as glamorous research. It gets published in our top-tier journals. Many Chinese scientists get bonuses for publishing in our top-tier journals. We are driving these incentives because we persist in seeing this, again, as a health and safety issue rather than a national security issue. So I think it is in our power to change it. And I think this is one issue where our interests are actually aligned with those of China and really indeed every other established nation. These are asymmetric tools of mass death.
Okay. Wow. What a statement. See what I mean? There's all kinds of things being thrown out there in this hearing. It is very esoteric. It is very dry. But these things are truly amazing. Let's listen to what this doctor is having to say. I don't know his name right now. Wait, this is Senator Paul.
Trying to understand what caused the pandemic and trying to come up with solutions. Each of your statements, which is longer than your testimony, will be available for anybody who's interested. I wanted to point out one thing from Dr. Ebright's testimony, just for those who say, well, lab leaks should be discounted. They don't ever happen. At one point, Dr. Ebright writes, the second, third, fourth, and fifth entries of the SARS virus, this was the first one, into human populations occurred as a laboratory accident in Singapore in 2003. a laboratory accident in Taipei in 2003, and 2 separate laboratory accidents in Beijing in 2004. So for people who say that it's a conspiracy theory that this could have come from the lab, they're discounting our history. The history has had these lab leaks. And so whether or not we'll ever know for 100% certain whether this came from the lab, we have had lab leaks. And we have to realize the potential danger of these pathogens.
All right, so that's Senator Rand Paul. Like I said, we're monitoring that. I've got the captions on, and I'm monitoring that as we go through this day. But something tells me you're going to be hearing a little bit more about this hearing than what you might expect, because there's some very, very good statements being made by learned men of research of all of this, and good questions, not lurid sensationalist ones by politicians. It's a very, very good hearing, and we're paying attention to this because just as that doctor said, look, any rational group of human beings must realize the incredible danger involved in gain of function research regarding a way to engineer what would normally be a harmless virus and turning it into a killer. There is no reason to do that unless you're trying to turn these viruses into a killer. Now, I know exactly why China decided to take that genome down. I know exactly why. Because it was a smoking gun that we just heard talked about by one of these scientists. It was a smoking gun. And therefore, what does that mean? The only two things it can be is either it was a purposeful biological attack or it was an accidental biological attack. But either way, it was a biological attack, and not for the first time coming out of China, which is something that Rand Paul just brought up. So let's move on. We've been talking a little bit about elections and so on and so forth. There's another great big one coming up in 2024, and President Trump President Biden is dealing with what, for all intents and purposes, could be a mutiny. This from the Washington Examiner. A shadow primary is developing among Democrat politicians concerned about President Joe Biden's prospect for winning a second term and interested in running for the top job themselves. The shadow primary is fueled by a wave of articles in the legacy media questioning Biden's leadership, age, cognitive ability. Recent stories in CNN and the Washington Post have blistered President Biden on these fronts. A recent poll revealed the majority of people do not want President Biden to run again. This is well over 66.6%. Over 2/3 of the American people, Democrats and Republicans, do not want President Biden to run. I mean, so the president said when he went into office he wanted to be a unifier. Well, arguably, he is a unifier. Unfortunately, I don't think it's the way that he had intended. More about this coming up in just a couple of seconds. You're listening to The Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Feel free to call. Be more than happy to take your call and put you on the air if you'd like. Also, by the way, you can chat with us. Great rollicking debate going on right now in the chat room. We'll be back with more in a moment. This is The Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being a part of the broadcast today. We are talking about a Washington Examiner magazine article by Tevi Troy. It's worth chasing down that President Biden is facing a mutiny among his own party. It is far from a whisper campaign. There have now been 2 Democrat House of Representatives members who are calling for President Biden to step away from the 2024 election. But that, as the article points out, is not the big news. The big news is a majority of Democrats do not want him to run either, including a staggering 94% of Democrat responders under the age of 30. The future of the Democrat Party is not with Joe Biden. Boy, I'll tell you, that's eye-watering. 94%? 94% of virtually any demographic group in the United States agreeing on one point? Whoa, 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 whoa. Each of the emerging contenders in this shadow primary is taking different approaches to getting ready for 2024. Vice President Kamala Harris has been quietly feeling out wealthy donors. Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois has been seen in important political states such as Florida and New Hampshire. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is blanketing the country and the airwaves, selling the Biden infrastructure law and pushing back against Republicans and getting transparently more attention than a transportation secretary generally does in the process, which is the point, by the way. Governor Gavin Newsom of California has perhaps garnered the most publicity of the bunch, releasing ads mocking Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and likely GOP presidential candidate, while claiming it has nothing to do with his interest in the presidency. Well, you can see through Gavin Newsom. Golly, that guy. Whoa. Man, it's really hard to watch that guy talk. He's so smug and so condescending. It's like, really? Really? Despite Biden vulnerabilities, the history of modern intra-party challenges shows why these politicians are treading somewhat lightly. Since the beginning of the 20th century, there have been 6 major single-candidate intra-party challenges to incumbent presidents. None of the challengers succeeded in winning the party nomination or the presidency. But more important, all of the incumbent presidents won, incumbent presidents, none of the, but more importantly, all of the incumbent presidents who were challenged failed to win re-election. Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson did not run again after their challengers damaged them in the primaries, and the other 4 lost re-election campaigns. In each case, the challenger weakened the president or perhaps revealed the existing weaknesses of the incumbent. Many of the challenges are extremely bitter. In 1968, McCarthy described the difference between Richard Nixon, one of Democrats' most hated Republicans, and LBJ is like choosing between vulgarity and obscenity. Sometimes a challenger tore apart friendships. Roosevelt and Taft had once been such close friends they would walk to work together. After the 1912 race, they became hated enemies, and so on. And this is a wonderful article that talks an awful lot about what President Biden is dealing with from members of his own party. But it's not just President Biden. This so-called mutiny by this article also touches on how Democrats are blasting the D.C. Democrat establishment, that incredible inside the Beltway echo chamber that is damaging the party's chances. And it's interesting the way he speaks about it. I'm talking about Josh Riley, an attorney, former Capitol Hill staffer. He's a candidate for the House of Representatives. He's torching the D.C. Democrat establishment, and I'll tell you why coming up in just a moment. You are listening to The Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. Let's get together. Let's talk it over. The news, the facts, commentary, debate. It is The Wells Report, and we shall return in a moment. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being here with us today as we go through the news, the facts, the commentary, and the debate. The Democrat Party is splintering right before our very eyes. There are real Democrats described by the mainstream media as moderate Democrats. There are leftist, progressive, socialist, anti-American fascists that the Democrat Party allowed to infest itself. There are Democrats who are very much against their own president and his continued service as the president of the United States. And then there are people who are trying to move the Democrat Party in a different direction. Typically younger, typically more interested in a functioning Democrat Party that functions somehow beyond just a leftist progressive agenda. One of them is a New York Democrat candidate for the House of Representatives. Josh Riley is an attorney and former Capitol Hill staffer running for the New York 19th District. He is criticizing Democrat talking points from the Democrat Party leadership in Washington. He says they are, quote, wildly out of touch, noting that he would lose all credibility if he repeated any of them to voters. This guy could be a real Democrat. He says this, quote, yeah, I've got to be honest, folks. A lot of it is really bad right now. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but it's the D.C. Democrat establishment doing us no favors. He went on to say this, quote, the talking points that come out of Washington from the Democrat Party are so wildly out of touch with the conversations we're having with each other across this community. Wow. You get talking points from the Democrat establishment in Washington to go tell people that the economy is great. Go tell people that jobs are booming and Joe Biden is the best jobs president ever. That's what they tell you to say. Riley said the reality is if he were to show up and say that those talking points in conversations, he would lose all of his credibility. They would think I am crazy. Yeah. Yeah, there are an awful lot of people, Democrats and Republicans and everybody else, who do believe these people are crazy. They are. And I got to be perfectly honest. With this. It's time for the people of the United States to show these people who's boss. Us. And we better get with it. Once again, I don't care what party you vote for, what party you support. I don't care who you vote for. It's none of my business. Just vote for different people. We've already seen what these people can and will do. It's time for us to leave them be and start repairing the damage. Both sides. Both parties. The Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee Chairman, Representative Sean Patrick Maloney, is pushing a narrative that doesn't appear to line up with reality. This according to this candidate, Josh Riley. He says it just doesn't seem to comport with what's real. And I've talked about that. Politics before reality. That's going to get us. We don't fix this. That will get us. Also, hypocrisy. Inflation hit 9.1% last month, and the most recent economic numbers officially showed a second consecutive contraction, officially putting the U.S. into a recession, to the chagrin of White House officials attempting to change the definition of what a recession is. Maloney of New York has pushed Democrat claims that the economy is actually doing well in the face of rising inflation and a recession. That must be his opponent. Even in the face of these numbers, Maloney, whose leadership, that's the chairman of the DCCC. Sorry, Patrick Maloney, representative. Even in the face of those numbers, Maloney, whose leadership has been questioned in his party and amid his potential member versus member re-election battle against a freshman lawmaker, bragged about giving his talking points to the party frontliners. Yeah, that's what's called propaganda. The frontliners who are left, the members of Congress right now I'm defending, They're battle tested. They're doing their work. They're getting their votes right. And they're bringing home a historic infrastructure bill, a rescue plan that saved the American economy and millions of small businesses. Community projects which are funding important local priorities and their own legislation that has been prioritized in our majority, said Maloney in an interview last month. Let me explain a couple of things about that. An historic infrastructure bill, which is more gasoline on inflation, a rescue plan that saved the American economy and millions of small businesses. There is no free lunch. All that money poured into the American economy by the U.S. government has ignited what is arguably, and this is an overused word, a financial crisis. We got a real problem here. The only way to solve the problem is to push the American economy into recession, which is exactly what they're doing. The Fed, independent of the U.S. government, if not independent of politics, the Fed is raising interest rates. That is going to curtail investment in our economy. And that is a recession. And all these guys in the White House, every time they open their mouth about, well, it's not actually a recession. No, it actually is. It actually is. And we're not stupid. It's almost like these people have forgotten that all the data that's available on run-of-the-mill Americans, you and me, regular people, all that information is also out there on them. Either they have real memory problems, or they honestly believe that the mainstream media is going to correct any of their mistakes and suppress any story that makes them look stupid. There are way too many Democrats talking about what is actually a recession, from Bill Clinton to everybody else you know in the Democrat Party. You just have to go back a few years. It's almost like they think that those tapes can't be found. They can be found. All that video is there. And they need to start acting like it. We also need to have our politicians of both parties commit to reality. They have to commit to reality, and they have to knock off this hypocrisy. Rules for thee, but not for me. Yeah, that's Governor Gavin Newsom and a whole bunch of other people. And it's not just confined to the Democrat Party. We need to call out hypocrisy every time we see it, and we need to make absolutely abundantly clear that hypocrisy will end your political career. And who's going to do that? We the people. It's time to show them who's boss. And we have another chance here in 90 days or so. We simply must take that chance. We must do that work. We must punish these people who believe their politics are more important than what's real, regardless of what those politics are. We have to hold responsible people that live in some strange, delirious world of craziness. And while President Biden is, I believe, doing the best job he can, even though obviously his strings are being pulled by somebody else, I mean, he's got to face the facts. That's one reality he has to work on. He's over it. He is not the man to lead this nation of either party. He's not the right guy. And don't forget what I was talking about in all this foo-for-ah with China, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. All this foo-for-ah with China that I've been talking about harkens back to a communist leader thinking that the president of the United States that was sitting right in front of him is weak. The president I'm talking about was John F. Kennedy in 1960 when he met with Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev came away from the meeting saying, we got this. Yeah, we got this. We absolutely have this. And that's how we got to the Cuban Missile Crisis, arguably the closest moment of worldwide nuclear annihilation during the Cold War. One Soviet submarine commander stopped the use of nuclear weapons against an American aircraft carrier during that conflict. That's way too close for comfort. What will the Chinese do? Well, they've surrounded Taiwan. We'll talk about that. They've surrounded Taiwan, and they're letting loose with live fire exercises, up to and including firing missiles into the airspace over Taiwan. Oh, really? You know, that's just evil. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But let's get back to this. This Maloney dude, who is the chairman of the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, Sean Patrick Maloney, talks about frontliners. Those are the people holding water for these D.C. talking points. He's been criticized by several of his fellow House Democrats for meddling in Republican primary races instead of investing in races of incumbents who are facing some of their toughest elections. Vulnerable Democrat Representative Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan called Maloney's meddling in GOP primaries strange decision-making. It's going to cost him. And she said, let them know that. Slotkin's fellow vulnerable Democrat Representative Tom Malinowski of New Jersey called Maloney's decision-making wrong, and Florida Democrat Representative Stephanie Murphy said no race is worth compromising your values in that way. That's the hypocrisy I'm talking about. The DCCC investing in Republican candidates that they believe they can beat in the subsequent election. That's that ideology of people that are too smug, too arrogant, too confident in their own abilities. They're just too clever by half, shooting themselves in the foot and other various appendages of their bodies. Absolutely ridiculous. Representative Jason Crow of Colorado, this once again is an example of how the Democrat Party is eating itself, said that Sean Maloney's meddling in Republican primaries is a terrible idea. It's very dangerous, I think, this environment to be propping up candidates like that. Of course, it could backfire. It already has. And it's part of the reason why I don't think it's a good idea. Not only do I think it sends the wrong message, but it's substantively risky. Representative Dean Phillip, the Democrat from Minnesota, said, quote, it's dishonorable, it's dangerous, and it's just damn wrong. The congressman added the party is speeding up the departures of truly honorable and courageous Republicans like Representative Peter Meijer of Michigan, not so sure, who lost his primary election last night. Meijer was defeated by challenger John Gibbs, a housing and urban development official in the Trump administration who was endorsed by former President Donald Trump. The DCCC spent $425,000 on an ad boosting Gibbs in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. The Democrat Governors Association spent millions boosting Republican candidates like Dan Cox, the GOP gubernatorial nominee in Maryland. He's probably going to win that race. And the Democrat Party is going to be partially responsible for his success. Too clever by half. This is what happens when you think you have all the answers. This is what happens when you are so arrogant to believe that there's really no need to go through this ridiculous, messy process. We can figure it out. We can promote the careers of Republican politicians because we're going to beat them in November. Oh, yeah? I don't think so. The congressman called the DCC spending on Gibbs political jujitsu and said the Democrats were subsidizing his opponent's campaign. They're eating their young. That's exactly what they're doing. You know, there's an old adage that says when your opponent is making mistakes, don't interrupt them. Well, you know what? The Democrat Party is not my opponent. They are a power player in this nation, and they're screwing up. Oh, don't worry. The Republicans have had their moments too, and I pointed them out on this broadcast. They'll do it again. They can't help themselves. But this is a mess. All of this is a mess. And finally, Democrats, and I'm talking about non-progressive, non-blind, non-echo chamber ridden Democrats are pointing this stuff out. They're pointing this stuff out. And the Democrat Party better start listening. You know, this splintering right before the midterms, a lot of it's caused by finger pointing. I get that. I get it. Man, they had better get it together, or the Democrat Party is going to be out of power for a long time to come. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks again for joining us. Back with more coming up in just a couple of moments. You stay right there. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. We were talking a little bit about how the echo chamber in Washington, D.C. is essentially putting out talking points that are not based in reality, according to a Democrat House of Representatives candidate. It's not just him. As the Democrat Party begins to splinter in more and more places, a New York Times guest essay yesterday argued that both progressive and establishment Democrat Party emails and digital tactics were ineffective and actually had a negative impact on primary election turnout. Millions of dollars, hours were wasted in 2018 and 2020, and yet the party stares down a bleak midterm landscape. The Democrat establishment and progressive organizations alike are doubling down on the same old scare tactics. The author said the Democrats, both far left and the establishment, believe voters to be data points best engaged via atomized campaigns orchestrated from afar, remote control electioneering. And that's what they're doing. All politics is local. Tip O'Neill. They noted campaign emails from people like Speaker of House Nancy Pelosi, who sounded the alarm on democracy in a recent email, said it was in immediate danger before asking for donations. I don't know how else to say this, so I'll be blunt. All these top Democrats would not be sounding the alarm if our democracy wasn't in immediate danger of falling to Republicans in this election. I need 8,371 patriots to step up before time runs out, rush $15 and help me close the fundraising gap before the end of the month deadline in 48 hours. This according to the Pelosi email. What deadline? What deadline? What are they? This is simply conjuring up anxiety for no reason whatsoever. Anyway, that being said, scare tactics? Yeah, well, people have been bombarded with scare tactics from all political parties for at least the last 20 years. It's getting old. By the way, I do have to point this out. I don't know how to say this, says Nancy Pelosi in an email, so I'll be blunt. All these top Democrats would not be sounding the alarm if democracy wasn't in immediate danger of falling to Republicans in this election. I would make a correction if I were, say, for example, well, actually, I am who I am. I am a commentator, so I'll make the correction. I don't know how to say this. All these top Democrats would not be sounding the alarm if our democracy, not democracy. Democracy's just fine, Ms. Speaker. It's just fine. It's democracy that's at risk of falling to Republicans in this election. And it should be. It should be. The authors describe the tactic as a churn and burn when they refer to the email from Nancy Pelosi creating an artificial deadline and then saying, gosh, if we don't do that, the evil Republicans will win. And they said that this type of engagement becomes tiresome for voters. Boy, does it ever. And these apocalyptic messages fuel despair. And yeah, that's true. In elections where voters are already getting bombarded with ads, the odds that a volunteer contact can help get people to the polls may be canceled out by the odds the contact will turn them off entirely. Completely correct. Completely correct. Let me ask you this. I've over the years, I've run across a lot of people who listen to this broadcast who say they've got to disengage. I'm just getting away from this because I'm just bombarded with this, and I'm starting to get upset. For the sake of my blood pressure is a good one. Well, yeah. How many times can you beat the anxiety drum before people stop listening to it? We're there. That's why we work so hard to just bring fact. Here's the facts. I probably add to some of that anxiety. I mean, certain things that I'm able to put together are not seen by the typical folks that do this job. There have been times when I've been pretty frightened myself when I figured something out. You know, this Iranian nuclear deal, perfect example. The Iranians keep playing brinksmanship, and they keep evading, and they keep trying to wiggle out, and they keep moving forward to build their nuclear weapon. They are signing their own death warrant. They are signing their own death warrant. They need to stop. They need to stop. And that was one of the things I commented on. It scared a lot of people to death. It's true. But what we have got to understand is that this federal government is way, way, way too important in our lives, mainly because of their own work. They're working to be too big of a part of our lives. and it is going to snap back. You know, you can only vilify your political opponents just so long before it does snap back. There's a whiplash effect. Arguably, that's happened with Donald Trump. If Donald Trump was covered fairly, this country would be better off. But 95% of the mainstream media coverage was negative. I think that that's probably why he is still a viable political agent to this day. And he proved it last night or yesterday in the primary elections. We'll be back with more with the third hour of the Wells Report in just a moment. All right, stay where you are. I'll be right back. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. We bring you the news, the real news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out each. We talk about the difference between fact and news, as the mainstream media has indeed abandoned truth and chosen political sides. It makes no difference which side you're talking about or thinking about. That the media has chosen a side is destructive. We try to remedy that every day. The commentary is not news. Commentary is simply what I believe and what I think. I'm always telling you the truth when I say something, when I'm talking about what's going on in our country. I'm not doing so because I'm trying to grind a political axe. All I'm doing is I'm trying to let you know where I see all this going. But that's just an opinion, just as valuable as yours. Join us. 816, where did I say that? 817-379-2172 is our telephone number. We also have a chat room that you can find on YouTube and Twitch and Twitter and Facebook. A lot of people are checking in from all of those sites. Let's see, what do we have here? It would be so awesome if the mainstream media would be on our side for a while for a change. Well, they're learning. The boss of CNN is trying to haul that news organization away from the political brink. I am actually impressed with what I see him trying to do. I've tried to reach out to him. I may send him a resume. I would really love to help them if they're serious. But how do you, once you've poisoned a news organization with politics, or for that matter, any organization with politics, how do you drag it back? How do you drag it back to reality? How do you do it? CNN's ratings couldn't be worse. They couldn't be. They just couldn't be. I have no idea why MSNBC is even on the air. What for? Yeah, CNN did start okay. Yeah, they did. Yeah, that was one of Ted Turner's amazing genius ideas. CNN was perfect. Revolutionized life in America. A 24-hour news channel. And they started veering off the track when Ted Turner moved away from the organization. But it's a monument to a good thing that Ted Turner wanted to do. Very much like we do here on the Wells Report. We simply want to give you the news. What you do with it is your business, and your business only. Once again, a straight newscast, not something that I would do, not something that I can do. So there is commentary, but I make sure that you know that when I issue an opinion, that it's not the news, and I make sure you understand its opinion. So Nancy Pelosi went out and appeared in Taiwan, and it was a good thing. I don't find myself agreeing with Nancy Pelosi very often, but in this trip, I see something from her that I have not seen. That doesn't mean that I don't have some serious concerns. Because I believe that there should be one voice coming from the United States regarding foreign affairs, and that voice is the president's. And she is not the president, even though there are times when I think she believes she is. One of the things that I'm concerned about, I'll get to here in just a couple of moments. During her historic trip to Taiwan on Wednesday, this from CNN, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said her visit was intended to make it unequivocally clear that the United States would not abandon Taiwan. China responded to Pelosi's trip, launching military exercises, we'll get to those in a moment, which China's Ministry of Defense said began today with drills on both the seas and airspaces surrounding Taiwan. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense said 27 Chinese warplanes made incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, and 22 planes crossed the median line dividing the Taiwan Strait happening today. An unprecedented number since Taiwan began publicly releasing information about China's air incursions 2 years ago. Nancy Pelosi departed the island today for South Korea. There are already signs of strains on her visit to Taipei. The first by sitting U.S. House Speaker in 25 years, had placed on Washington's relationship with Beijing. There should be strains in that relationship. Those crazy people actually brought up and then said out loud in the worldwide media that they might shoot down the aircraft that contain Nancy Pelosi. And what did the Biden administration do about that? At least in public? Absolutely nothing. Didn't say a word about it. One of the greatest spokespersons that has ever stood behind a dais and ever spoken to the mainstream media, and that would be hold on just a minute. I'm coming up with his name. I know him as Admiral Kirby. Yeah, but he's been speaking very, very well about it. Kirby has been talking about this, and his assurance that nobody's really expecting China to do anything, that's not good enough. Nobody expects China to shoot down Nancy Pelosi's plane. That's not the point. The point is that they actually said it in the first place. What, are you nuts? Are you flipping kidding? Just a simple statement, a very superpower-esque statement saying China would never recover from a decision like that. Simple statement. They would never recover, which is a hell of a lot better than John Kirby, thank you, than John Kirby saying, nobody really took that seriously. I took it seriously. I did. I still do. How dare the Chinese government even think of something like that? What are they doing? And they weren't called on it. So Nancy Pelosi said this. She wanted to make it unequivocally clear that the United States would not abandon Taiwan. I agree with that. We cannot abandon Taiwan. The good faith of the United States of America when it comes to democratically run states must be unequivocal. But that's not what we get. We don't get it. We don't get it. The government of the United States says they do not back Taiwan independence. Why the hell not? Why the hell not? I brought this up earlier in the show on the first podcast. This, by the way, is the third one. If you missed the other two, go back and get them. They're pretty good today. What I said was when it comes to the government of the United States dealing with the government of the People's Republic of China, what I said is that if this government is afraid to confront the Chinese government on things that must be confronted, like a threat against the Speaker of the United States, Speaker of the House of the United States of Representatives, there needs to be an unequivocal response. And that we didn't do that was dumb. It was dumb. It's either that, and like I said earlier, the Chinese government is way too deep in the pants of the United States government right this minute. Way too deep in there. Better get it done. Better get that fixed in a big fat hurry. So China has already started with these drills that I was speaking of. They also hit Taiwan with trade restrictions. This from CNN Business. China has suspended some trade with Taiwan in apparent retribution for a visit by the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The curbs include suspension of fruit and fish imports from Taiwan and exports of natural sand to the island. China is Taiwan's largest trading partner. Bilateral trade worth $273 billion just last year. It accounts for 33% of the island's total trade with the rest of the world, according to the Taiwanese government. Experts are concerned about the impact escalating tensions between Taipei and Beijing and what it may have on Taiwan's semiconductor industry. The self-governed democratic island of 24 million people is a global leader in the supply of semiconductors, which are a vital component for virtually all modern electronics, from cars to refrigerators to mobile phones. China's Taiwan Affairs Office said today that it would suspend imports of grapefruit, lemons, oranges, and other citrus fruits, as well as chilled white striped hairtail and frozen horse mackerel. Gosh, a day without white striped hairtail and frozen horse mackerel is like a day without sunshine. Ugh. In a separate statement, Chinese customs officials said the import suspension of citrus fruit is a result of pest control and excessive pesticide residues, and cited COVID prevention for the suspension of natural seafood imports. China's commerce industry, ministry rather, suspended exports of natural sand to Taiwan, a key component for the production of semiconductor chips. I didn't know that. I didn't have any idea about that. Yeah. I like most people, think that it's basically just a part and parcel of some people's actual dietary needs. All the sandwiches there. Sorry. Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan has triggered the expected ire of Chinese authorities, said analysts from the ING Group. In response, Taiwan officials said that China's sand export suspension would have a limited effect, and the Chinese sand accounts for less than 1% of its total demand for its semiconductor industry. China has previously banned imports of some Taiwanese products amid escalating tensions. Last year, China banned imports of pineapples from the island, followed by some types of apples later in the year, citing pest control. Earlier this year, it also banned Taiwanese grouper fish, a high-value seafood product from Taiwan, citing detection of some banned drugs. Oh, okay. Why don't they just say, why don't governments just tell the truth? We're banning this because we don't like you. We want to cost you some very serious financial problems. And what about those military exercises? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. Join us on our chat room. Let's see. China wanted to see if America is as weak as our leader. Could be. Gary says China is all blow, so is Pelosi on her Taiwan boondoggle. Drink up, Nancy. Well, I don't know. I thought she did some good work, although it makes me nervous. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is talking about not abandoning Taiwan. Don't get me wrong. I support not abandoning Taiwan. But there are at least some diplomatic fish to fry there. Pardon the pun. This is the Wells Report, back in just a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. By all means, please do join us. Sure would appreciate it. Be mighty nice. So, after the visit by Nancy Pelosi, China is essentially trying to intimidate Taiwan by shows of their military might, which are just plain provocative. China is running this from Fox News. China is running a slew of military drills near Taiwan. China's military is running live fire combat training in the Taiwan Strait, a narrowly disputed body of water between mainland China and Taiwan. The military is reportedly practicing blockades at sea and missile launches, as well as combat on land. The Chinese military is utilizing advanced technology in the drill, including J-20 stealth fighters and DF-17 hypersonic missiles. There are reports that those missiles have indeed flown over and through the airspace of the Republic of China, Taiwan. In the event of future military conflict, it's likely that operational plans currently being rehearsed will be directly translated into combat operations, said Chinese military official Song Zhongping told the nation's state tabloid, The Global Times. It's actually a newspaper. It means that our battle plan has been made clear to the U.S. and Taiwan authorities, and we are confident enough to inform them of the consequences of further propagation in this way. The Global Times went on to claim the exercises would enter the area within 12 nautical miles of the island, and that so-called median line will cease to exist. That median line is something that they may want to reconsider after these exercises are over. International waters begin 12 miles off the coast of any country in the world. Strangely, that was established by the range of naval cannon at the time when it was established. There was for a while an idea that it should be 200 miles, but it sort of went away into unreality. But that is, along with the missile launches over the island, that's very serious. The People's Republic of China has long claimed sovereignty over Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait, the relatively narrow strip of ocean between the island of Taiwan and the Chinese mainland. The Chinese military has frequently sent planes into the area, testing Taiwan's air defense zone. The U.S. does not have official relations with Taiwan, which is stupid, also known as the Republic of China, and maintains a one China policy that recognizes the People's Republic of China as the legitimate successor nation. China issued stern warnings against Pelosi's visit in previous weeks, including threats from ministry spokesman Li Jianzhao. China resolutely defines its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Despite the bluster, Pelosi's congressional delegation arrived and departed Taiwan with little to no military obstacles. It's like this. We, the people of the United States and our government, really have no reason not to confront the Chinese. We have no reason to not call their bluff. No reason whatsoever. I mean, think about it. What are they going to do? Are they going to, send a biological weapon to us and get us all sick and kill? Oh. What are they going to do? Are they going to try to flood our country with dangerous drugs that kill people? Oh, wait. They made it abundantly clear that they want to be the successor nation to the United States of America. So what do we lose by upsetting them? Something tells me we lose a whole lot of nothing. Maybe we should stop worrying about it so much. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. A little bit of inside baseball. Sports fans in the DFW area are rabid. I have never been in a place that was so interested in their football team or their baseball team as Dallas-Fort Worth is. I lived in Detroit. You know, the Tigers were a big part of life. The Lions, the Lions. I lived in Atlanta. The Falcons and the Braves. Yeah, they're a big part of life out there, but it's not like it is here in Texas, in Dallas-Fort Worth. During the football season, which is getting underway, you end up in a place where if the Cowboys win, everybody complains about how come they didn't win enough. Now that's endemic to the Southeast. All right. Football's a religion in America's South. It's just a religion. Okay. And everybody's a football coach and everybody is just deeply inured in football at any level here. It's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. It's cute. When the Cowboys win, people say, well, they should have done this and they should have done that and they would be better and blah, 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 blah. Okay? But if they lose, everybody is grumpy. And I mean, everyone around here is grumpy. The entire Dallas-Fort Worth area becomes the island of misfit toys. It's just, I've never seen anything like it. Meanwhile, Gary is a Rangers fan. That's our baseball team. And they're trying to break through the 500 barrier. That's where you win as many games as you lose. They're playing the Oakland. Are they playing the Orioles? Okay, they're playing the Orioles, and it was top of the ninth. It's 6-2, and the Rangers are 4 runs or 5 runs away from breaking 500 on the season. For us, that's our World Series, according to Gary, because that's what happens when you got a guy named John Daniels in charge. He's the general manager of the Texas Rangers. So anyway, he's feeling very upset. He wants the Rangers to get over 500. It's okay, Gary. They'll make it. They will. Honest. I had to bring that up. It was in the chat room, and you can join us in the chat room too. I'm all over it. Okay. I've been in broadcasting since I was 15. That's nearly 50 years. And I've worked for giants. The greatest creative business and art-driven minds in America, arguably, were participants in radio during my career. A lot of them are gone now. Things changed. But those rules that they taught us in order to do winning radio are embedded in my bones, including one of the very first things that I learned about radio, that winning radio stations operate in the public interest as a public trustee. In other words, the people of the United States, until 10, 15 years ago, were served by an entire industry that did more good than harm in their communities. as a matter of government regulation. In 1996, that changed. And the effects of that took a little while. But radio isn't what it was. That's not the point. But the education that I got as a broadcaster and my commitment to being a public trustee has sustained a nearly half-century career. After I finally realized that I was one of the old guys, I started speaking out about what radio did right and what radio did wrong. And I may have harmed myself. Not because I was trying to be a jerk, but because I was trying to get a better product. I've had much more success than a lot of the radio stations that I've worked at. And it's not because of me, not because I'm brilliant, not because of any of that. It's for two reasons. Reason number one, you. The only reason I'm still in this business is because of you. I'm still that public trustee. You have given me great success. The other reason I'm still in radio is because of all that training from those giants. Not always comfortable, but always successful. I wanted the radio station to have as much success as I had been given by you. And that meant doing some things that may have been at cross purposes with the business ideology at the time. But those rules are required. And when you break those rules, you do so at your peril. I was talking about the mainstream media in the first hour of the Wells Report today, and I brought up how the mainstream media, in abandoning truth and choosing political sides, had provided a huge disservice to the people of the United States. It hurts them. It hurts I was discussing the Democrat Party's alliance with the mainstream media. It hurts the Democrat Party, it hurts the mainstream media, and it hurts us. And I was talking about how I wasn't planning on doing that, and I never will. But I was also discussing the fact that for a lot of reasons, straightforward news reporting is pretty damn boring. If you want to succeed, I mean, from a standpoint of fame and money and so on, it helps to be one of the people on the fringe. It doesn't make any difference which fringe you're on. If you're crazy, you will draw an audience. And if you're crazy enough, you'll draw a very big audience. And one of those guys that's on the fringe, that has drawn a very big audience, is currently fighting for his financial life in a courtroom. I'm discussing a guy named Alex Jones. Alex Jones was described in the journalism surrounding this particular jury case. He was described as a conspiracy theorist. I don't know that he would describe himself that way. He might describe himself as a broadcaster. I describe him as an irresponsible broadcaster. I describe him as a journalistic nightmare. I'm kind of a bore when it comes to Alex Jones, and I've offended his listeners in discussing what he does, and moreover, what he doesn't do. Alex Jones reported on the Sandy Hook massacre, where little kids were destroyed and the entire country was confronted with horror. And during his show, when he was describing Sandy Hook, he said that it was one of his favorite descriptions is a false flag operation. And it was essentially the Democrat Party working to vilify assault weapons so that they could have an excuse to ban them. That particular ideology is not really nuts, insofar as Fast and Furious during the Obama administration was doing exactly that. But these people who lost children at Sandy Hook heard that it was some false flag operation, that nobody actually died, and that it was a government plot, which heaped misery on top of unspeakable tragedy, remorse, and horror that those parents of those kids that were slain had already been dealing with. The parents of a child who was murdered during the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting delivered emotional testimony in a court here in Texas, telling a jury the lies pushed by right-wing conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, this is CNN Business copy, have stained the legacy of their son and tormented them for years. The jury hearing the case will determine how much in damages Jones will have to pay the parents. Neil Hesland and Scarlett Lewis, who won a default judgment against him earlier this year. An attorney representing Hesland and Lewis asked the jury last week to award them $150 million. Fighting back tears at times, Hesland told the jury that Jones, through his conspiratorial media organization InfoWars, tarnished the honor and legacy of their son. Said he couldn't even begin to describe the last 9.5 years of hell he's endured because of Jones. There's got to be a strong deterrent that shall prevent him from peddling this propaganda, Hesland said. To restore my credibility, my reputation, and Jesse's legacy that he so much deserves. As Hesland testified, a television screen in the court showed a photograph of his murdered son, 6-year-old Jesse Lewis. Jones, who expected to testify in his own defense later, was absent from the courtroom during Hesland's testimony. And the first part of Lewis's testimony, Hesland called that absence a cowardly act. True. I've been here for a week and a half, and during my final testimony, Mr. Alex Jones does not have the courage to sit in front of me or face me. He said that lies pushed by Jones resonated around the world. He realized how dangerous it is. He described repeatedly being confronted by those who believe Jones over the last 10 years, saying such interactions occur right up to this day. Hesland said, "My life has been threatened. I fear for my life. I fear for my safety and my family's safety and their lives." In a remarkable moment, Lewis spoke directly to Jones, who was in the courtroom after the trial broke for lunch. She said she wanted to address Jones to his face. "Jesse was real. I'm a real mom." Lewis told Jones that she thinks he didn't actually believe the lies he pushed about Sandy Hook. "That's the problem. I know you know that. But you keep saying it. Why? For money?" Lewis said having 6-year-old son shot in the forehead while at school is an unbearable pain. And then to have someone on top of that perpetuate a lie that was a hoax, that it didn't happen, that it was a false flag, that I was an actress. "Do you think I'm an actress?" Ms. Lewis said. "There's not been a sincere apology," she said, but if there was ever, I liken it to being in a car accident where you run over someone and cause tremendous bodily damage, and you look at that person lying on the ground and say, I'm so sorry, I'm not accountable for any of the damage I just caused, but I'm sorry." That's how I see it. When you're a broadcaster, you have to remember that there are people out there and they're real. And you have to report the truth. You can't just throw stuff out there because you're trying to feed somebody's adrenaline junkie high. And that's my dispute with Alex Jones. Because sooner or later, like most habits, you have to keep amplifying them and ramping them up to get that same adrenaline high. Until eventually, what you're talking about starts to destroy things around you. And that's what's happening to Alex Jones. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. I was just talking about broadcasters and broadcasting. And one of the greatest broadcasters who ever spoke on a microphone on television or radio has just died. His name was Vin Scully. Vin Scully was magical. He'd been in broadcasting forever. His entire professional endeavor was devoted to it. And he gave us some of the most iconic calls in baseball as the main broadcaster for the Los Angeles Dodgers. In 1988, Game 1 of the World Series, Kirk Gibson stepped up to the plate to try to get around the Oakland A's. Dennis Eckersley, the greatest closer of his era, was pitching to him. And Kirk Gibson was hurt so badly he didn't come out and was not introduced at the beginning of the game. Vin Scully said, "Look who's coming up to bat, Kirk Gibson." The Dodgers were a run down, one man on base, and Kirk Gibson stepped up to the plate. 3-2, bottom of the ninth.
Sachs waiting on deck, but the game right now is at the plate.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
It still raises the hair on my body. Legs, arms, back, everywhere. It was one of the most amazing things ever. And speaking of amazing things, there was another moment. And it was the final call at Dodger Stadium as he ended his amazing career.
Swung on a high fly ball to deep left field. The Dodger bank empties. Would you believe a home run? And the Dodgers have clinched the division and will celebrate on schedule.
Charlie Culbertson, walk-off home run. This is his last call. September 25th, 2016 versus the Rockies. They became the 26th.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. Game-winning home run. What a moment to have it. And would you believe his first home run of the year?
Yeah. And that's how he closed out his career. There's an art to communicating on the radio. You can dump a bushel basket full of words on somebody and you can describe everything. And you can essentially give so much information that the moment is lost. What was amazing about Vin Scully was his ability to simply say, exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. He also understood the value of not saying anything. In my career, and most notably right before my most recent position, I used pauses to give people a chance to catch up to what I was saying, to let them have a moment to consider the concept we were discussing. I learned that from Vin Scully. Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing. And so when I say that I've learned from giants, although I've never, ever worked for Vin Scully or the Dodgers. Actually, I did work for the Dodgers a little while in their AAA farm affiliate in Las Vegas. But what I will say is that by the time I had gotten a little farther along in radio, so I actually knew what I was hearing, the genius of Vin Scully came shining through and hit me in the face like somebody hit me in the face with a shovel. All of broadcasting revered Vin Scully because he was just so good at it. He had studied so much, and his amazing ability, his encyclopedic mind, honed to a perfect polish that he put on display every time he opened the mic. just resonate and will continue to resonate through time. "94 years of age. Vin Scully. Rest in peace." This has been the Wells Report. I hope you have a great day. Be safe. Make good decisions, says Susan Grushinsky Wells, and I will see you tomorrow. Okay. All right. Thanks for the very good words. Thank you for the very good words on the chat today, and thanks for your kind attention. God bless all y'all. Let's get back together tomorrow. Say 2 o'clock Central Time? Fine. It's a date.